By the time I turned 50, I thought I'd built something unshakable, a wife who trusted me, a daughter who loved me, and a son I'd raised as my own. But then the son I gave everything to started whispering shadows into their ears, and suddenly I was the stranger in my own home. I didn't see the knife coming, because he wasn't stabbing fast, he was drowning me slow. I always figured by 50, I'd earned a little peace. Nothing fancy, just a steady house, the same creaky old chair I liked, a dog that barked too much, and the kind of silence you learn to appreciate after raising kids and clocking in 30 years of real work. I wasn't chasing dreams anymore. I'd already caught the ones that mattered. My wife, Joanna, was still with me after 32 years. My daughter, Kelsey, was building her career in social work. And then there was Zach. Zach was our adopted son. We brought him in when he was 8. He came from a rough foster situation, and we were told not to expect too much. But I didn't buy that. I believed love and time fixed more than people admitted. He was small, quiet, guarded. But I saw something in him. Not talent, not genius, just a flicker, a need for safety. And I gave it to him. I gave him everything. That's probably why it hurt the way it did. Not like a knife, not quick. More like a slow, quiet drowning. You don't realize what's happening until you can't breathe anymore. It started the year he turned 23. Joanna and I were nearing retirement. I'd pulled from my pension early and started consulting part-time, mostly to stay busy. Zach had moved back in temporarily. He said he needed to regroup after dropping out of college. I didn't make a fuss. I figured we all take a few wrong turns in our 20s. Then things shifted, subtly at first. One morning, I was sipping coffee on the porch when Joanna came out, her mouth tight. "You know what Zach told me last night?" she said. "That you think Kelsey's work is a waste of time." I blinked. "What? I've never said that." She shrugged like it wasn't even up for debate. "Well, he said you did." I let it go. Maybe he misunderstood something I'd said in passing. No big deal. But then Kelsey started getting colder on the phone. Shorter texts. Less interest in coming over. When she did visit, she'd glance at me like I was on thin ice. Zach, meanwhile, would sit in the corner of the living room with his phone, acting like he wasn't listening, though he always was. A few weeks later, Joanna and I got into our first real argument in years. Over nothing, really. I'd forgotten to take out the trash. She said something about how I always expect other people to clean up after me. Always. It was like they were all holding a different version of me in their heads. A cruel one. An arrogant one. I started to notice Zach and Joanna having long, whispered conversations in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. Or the way Kelsey and Zach would go for walks alone and stop talking the second I joined them. They looked united. Like a team. Like I was the outsider in my own home. I tried to confront Zach once. I asked him, calmly, why he told Joanna I said things I hadn't. He didn't get angry, just stared at me, then said, "I think you say a lot of things you don't remember, Dad." That word, Dad, hit different coming from him then. It used to sound full of trust. Now it sounded like mockery. I tried to explain myself to Joanna. I said I felt like something was off, like Zach was turning people against me. She told me I was being paranoid, that I was making up drama where there wasn't any, that I'd always had a bit of a control problem. Always. A few nights later, I came downstairs to get a glass of water and heard Joanna crying softly in the den. Zach was there, rubbing her back, whispering something I couldn't quite hear. She looked at him like a lifeline. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out where it had all gone wrong. By Christmas, I was eating dinner at the same table as my family, but I might as well have been a stranger. Every word I said felt like it passed through a filter of suspicion. If I cracked a joke, no one laughed. If I offered advice, they rolled their eyes. I remember pouring wine that night, and Zach said to Joanna, "Maybe you shouldn't. You know how he gets." She took the glass from my hand. No one spoke for a long minute, and I didn't say a word. I just sat back down. It was like death by 1,000 small humiliations. Then came the final blow. I was walking the dog one evening when my neighbor, Ken, who'd known me 20 years, asked if I was doing okay. "Of course," I said. "Why?" He scratched the back of his neck. "Well, it's just, Zach mentioned you'd been kind of off. Said you were maybe slipping. Memory, mood swings. That sort of thing." That was the moment. Not the worst moment, mind you. Just the moment I realized I was losing more than my family. I was losing my reputation. My identity. When I got home, I asked Joanna about it. She didn't deny it. She said Zach was just concerned, that he'd read something about early onset dementia. Dementia? Me. The man who worked 40 years without missing a beat, who fixed the plumbing, balanced the checkbook, remembered every birthday, every bill. Now I was being spoken about like some burden, some cracked old man. And the way Joanna looked at me then, not angry, just unsure, that was worse than any scream. That night, I went into the garage, sat on the cold bench, and cried harder than I ever had. Not just from sadness, from confusion, because I still didn't understand why. Why was he doing this? I raised that boy. I gave him a home, a name, love. And now he was dismantling me one whisper at a time. I didn't leave. I didn't fight back. I just got quiet. I suppose that's when something else started. Not revenge. Not yet. But I began to think differently. And I stopped speaking quite so freely. After that night in the garage, something in me went quiet, but not the way they hoped. I didn't disappear, didn't retreat into some shadow of myself. I simply stopped handing them ammunition. No more defending things I didn't say. No more trying to correct the stories Zach had planted. I stayed polite, predictable, careful. That seemed to put them at ease. If Joanna invited me to join them for dinner, I'd smile and say, maybe later. I still made repairs around the house, trimmed the hedges, walked the dog every evening like always. I still asked how Kelsey's job was going, still offered to help carry groceries from the car. The difference was, I never pushed when they gave me nothing in return. I stopped trying to fix what they didn't think was broken. Zach noticed. That first week, he hovered more than usual, testing the water. One morning I came in from mowing, and he was leaning against the fridge, arms crossed, like he'd been waiting. You doing okay, Dad? He asked, his tone almost too casual. Just fine, I said, wiping my hands. Staying busy. He studied me for a beat too long. I kept my expression easy. I think he expected a crack in the surface. I didn't give it to him. That afternoon, Kelsey came over. We were all in the kitchen. Joanna mentioned something about calling the plumber to check the downstairs sink, and I said, that's not a bad idea. I'll take a look first, though. Joanna cut in. We already did that. Last week. I blinked. Did we? Zach chuckled and looked between them. See, Mom? He doesn't even remember you told him that yesterday. Joanna's face shifted, just slightly. A tight smile. Kelsey glanced up from her phone. She didn't say anything, but I caught the hesitation in her eyes, like she was logging that moment. I didn't argue. I just nodded and said, guess I'm losing track. Later that week, I heard Kelsey on the phone in the backyard with a friend. I wasn't eavesdropping, just passing through to the shed, but I caught a piece of it. Yeah, it's just hard. Zach says it's not our fault, that it's normal. But still, it's my dad. She said it like he was already halfway gone, like she was mourning someone still breathing. That was when I started spending more time at the library. Told Joanna I was volunteering, helping with book donations and inventory. What I actually did was work in the archives. I liked the order of it. Old tax filings, newspaper records, court summaries, obituary indexes. I learned a lot. Names, dates, sale transfers. And while it might have looked like busy work, I was paying attention. Back home, I started keeping a notebook in the garage. I left it out in the open, next to the toolbox. To anyone else, it looked like a to-do list. Furnace check. Irrigation system. Budget summary. But the way I wrote it, the way I made sure certain items were marked and underlined, that wasn't an accident. It was a small invitation, meant to be noticed, misinterpreted, and slowly feared. Once, I added a note that read, recheck access privileges, Tuesday. Zach must have seen it, because the next morning, the page had a slight crease it didn't have the day before. Nothing else moved. But I saw it. And I knew he had too. Joanna came to me a few days later with a pamphlet, something about care transition plans. She framed it gently, said she'd been reading, just in case things ever became more difficult. I appreciate you thinking ahead, I said. She looked relieved, like I'd just confirmed something. Zach didn't even wait for pretense anymore. One evening, I walked into the living room while he was showing Joanna something on his laptop. When I entered, he clicked the tab shut. You need something, Dad? He asked, too fast. Just passing through. He smiled, and I could see it. He believed he was already in control. Kelsey came by again in early October. She stayed for dinner, but something in her demeanor had changed. She was polite, still called me Dad, still thanked me when I handed her the salt. But she sat closer to Zach now. Watched me a little longer. When I mentioned I'd driven to the store earlier that day, She frowned. You still driving yourself? She asked. Alone. I do all right. Zach jumped in with a soft chuckle. He's stubborn. You know how he gets. But we're keeping an eye on him. It was phrased like care. But Kelsey nodded. She didn't even look at me when she said, Good. After she left that night, I sat in the garage with the notebook open. My pen hovered over a new line for several minutes. I wrote nothing. Just sat there, staring at the last entry. Then I stood up, opened the filing cabinet, and moved a single key from one folder to another. I left the drawer slightly ajar. The next morning, the drawer was shut. I knew who had closed it. They thought I didn't notice. And that was exactly what I wanted. I didn't change anything about my routine. I still walked the dog at 6:15 sharp. But I could feel the temperature shifting inside the house. They didn't know what I was thinking. And that made them uneasy. Zach started testing the edges. You take your meds this morning, Dad? He'd ask, loud enough for Joanna to hear. I never had a prescription. He knew that. Another time, he asked twice in 1 week if I remembered to lock the front door. I always had. But he asked anyway. Just checking, he'd say with that calm, careful tone. Things have been a little fuzzy lately. Joanna didn't argue. Not anymore. And Kelsey, the last holdout, had started flinching less when Zach spoke for me. They were building a reality around me, brick by brick, expecting I wouldn't notice the walls closing in. Then the cracks started to show. Joanna mentioned she'd transferred money between our joint accounts. Later, Zach said he'd taken care of it. I asked about a recurring withdrawal I didn't recognize. Joanna brushed it off, something Zach had set up for household bills. I didn't argue. I just noted the amount. The time of day. The way Zach smiled a little too much when I didn't press. One evening, I found Joanna on the landline in the garage. Odd. She never used that phone. She hung up quickly when I walked in and said she was ordering a part for the dishwasher. The dishwasher wasn't broken. There was no part. I nodded and walked back into the house without a word. The next morning, I left the notebook open on the workbench again. Added a new line near the top. Check discrepancy, savings ledger versus online log. Dated and initialed, just like any forgetful old man might. 3 days later, the page was dog-eared backward. Someone had flipped through, then tried to set it back just right. Kelsey came by for dinner that weekend. She and Zach were in the kitchen when I walked in, talking low. The second I entered, she cut off mid-sentence. What's that? I asked casually. Kelsey glanced at Zach. Just something we were reading. About power of attorney. I paused. Just a second. Smart to plan ahead, I said, reaching for a glass of water. She hesitated, then said, almost to herself, we just want to make sure everything's safe. That word. Safe. Like I'd become something unpredictable. A risk. Later that night, she was in the den with Joanna. I passed by the door and heard her say, he's not dangerous. He's just different now. Joanna didn't argue. When they left the room, I picked up the mail off the side table. A letter was sticking out of Joanna's purse, unopened, but I recognized the seal from our estate lawyer's office. The date was recent. I slid it back in, untouched, and went to make coffee. The next week, Zach hosted what he called a family meeting. Said it was just to check in, make sure everyone's aligned. He even brought snacks. I sat at the table while he walked us through a printed list, budget items, maintenance tasks, upcoming appointments. He spoke like a project manager. Joanna nodded beside him. Kelsey was on speakerphone, quiet. Then Zach turned to me. Dad, we were wondering if you'd be open to letting us help with some of the financial oversight stuff, just to ease the pressure on you. I raised an eyebrow. You mean take over access? He smiled. Just temporary delegation, in case something slips through. Kelsey added softly, it's not personal. We just want to be prepared. I looked at all of them. For a moment, the room felt very small. Sure, I said. I trust you. Joanna smiled. Kelsey exhaled. Zach leaned back, satisfied. They thought that was it. That I'd rolled over. That same night, I reset the Wi-Fi password to a backup network only I knew existed. Swapped the lock on my office drawer. Updated our brokerage account with a 16-digit passcode I'd memorized 2 years ago and never written down. The next few days got interesting. Zach tried logging into the investment account and couldn't. Claimed the platform must have updated something. Joanna's usual banking login failed. I watched her try 3 times, then call Zach into the room. Can you reset this? I'll look into it later, he said, frowning. I stood at the sink, drying a plate. Let the silence speak for me. They didn't confront me. Not directly. But I felt the shift. Zach started leaving his laptop open on the kitchen table more often, carefully angled so I could see spreadsheets, password trackers, finance logs. Sending a message. Every time he looked over his shoulder, I made sure he saw me looking down. Calm. Unbothered. They were still watching me. But now, they weren't sure what they were looking for. I kept walking the dog. Kept writing in the notebook. Kept smiling when Zach forgot to include me in dinner plans or when Joanna, accidentally, left me off the lawyer group text. They were waiting for signs I was unraveling, and I gave them just enough to stay comfortable. But I saw it now. The nervous glances, the double-checking, the quiet rummaging through drawers. They were starting to wonder if I knew more than I let on. And they were right. By early November, the first real fracture appeared, and it didn't come from me. It came from them. Zach had been quietly managing Joanna's finances for months by then, ever since she added him to her new account. I stayed silent, but I watched. The calculator in her purse. The way she'd check the balance online, then check it again 10 minutes later. It wasn't fear yet, but it was doubt. And once doubt enters the room, it doesn't leave quietly. One morning over coffee, she muttered something about a second utility payment. I asked casually, "Did Zach say he was helping with that?" She hesitated. "He said it was on auto pay." I nodded. "Funny. That's when the doubles usually start." She didn't answer, but I saw her pull out her phone the moment I left the room. Joanna spent nearly an hour on the phone with the bank the next day. The morning after that, Zach looked pale, voice tight. He kept his phone close like he was waiting for a call that wouldn't come. That weekend, I found him in the garage, rifling through the old filing cabinet. He moved quickly, like someone retracing their own mistake. I watched, unseen, from the hallway as he shuffled folders, then stopped cold. The key I'd relocated weeks earlier had been returned to its old spot. He stared at it, closed the drawer, quietly, but not carefully. He was nervous. That mattered. Kelsey came for dinner that Thursday. She didn't know it yet, but Zach was already slipping with her too. Joanna mentioned a financial advisor he'd recommended. Kelsey blinked. "I thought he said you were handling all that yourself?" Joanna looked at her. "That's what I thought." Zach walked in from the other room, holding a bottle of wine. "What are we talking about?" he asked. Too smooth, too early. Nobody answered. I handed him the corkscrew. That night, I heard voices from the back porch. Joanna, sharp and clipped. Zach, trying to contain her. "You said everything was squared up." "It is. Mom, you're just confusing a few line items. Why are there 3 charges to the same vendor in 1 week?" Pause. "They're processing errors. I'll take care of it." She didn't respond. The next morning, she was gone before breakfast. No note. No goodbye. By the following week, Zach stopped leaving his laptop out. Started locking the guest room door. Joanna barely spoke at dinner. Kelsey stopped replying to his texts. Something was shifting, and he felt it. I could see it in his eyes, the gears grinding, trying to reverse decay. Then the letter arrived. Not addressed to me. Not to Joanna. Just a plain white envelope, marked occupant, from the Department of Human Services. Joanna opened it. Read it once. Then again. Her hands didn't shake, but something in her hollowed out. She didn't ask if I sent it. Didn't look at me. Just folded the letter, placed it on the counter, and walked out to the driveway. Zach found it an hour later. He walked into the living room gripping the envelope. "Did you see this?" I looked at him. I did. He stared, waiting. "I guess someone's concerned," I said, calm as ever. His eyes lingered too long. Jaw clenched, then eased. Whatever he wanted to say, he swallowed it, and walked away faster than usual. Joanna had changed. She was closing her laptop when Zach entered the room now, making her own calls, checking her own accounts. One night, I passed her office. She had the original will open, the version I remembered, the one from before Zach offered to simplify things. A few days later, she asked, "Do you remember when we changed our estate documents last year?" I shrugged. "You and Zach handled that, I thought." She didn't answer, just stared at the paper. Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked older than I'd ever seen her. That weekend, the doorbell rang. I expected Zach. It was Kelsey. She hugged me. Genuinely. First time in months. The 3 of us sat in the living room, Joanna, Kelsey, and me. No Zach. Joanna spoke first. "Zach's been moving money around. Small amounts. It adds up." Kelsey didn't look surprised. Just tired. "He told me you'd been forgetting things. Confusing names." Dates, she said. I know what he told you, I said. The question is, what do you believe now? She didn't answer, but she didn't look away. Later that evening, Zach came home and found the three of us in the kitchen. Joanna going through a folder, Kelsey holding a bank statement. He froze. Something going on? Joanna stood slowly. Her voice wasn't angry, it was cold. We need to talk. I stepped back, letting them circle each other, letting him feel the walls closing in, letting him see that whatever control he thought he had was now slipping through his fingers faster than he could manage. He still didn't know how. He didn't know when it started. And that was the part that really got to him. Because the person he underestimated was still smiling. Joanna said, "We need to talk," and I stepped out of the kitchen. I made coffee and listened from the hallway as everything unraveled, exactly as planned. Zach denied it all at first, claimed the accounts were still in process, that the statements were just drafts. Something about a glitch in the banking app. But Kelsey pushed back. She had copies now, ones I'd quietly printed weeks ago from an old USB labeled Christmas photos. Joanna had the original will, the one before Zach's edits. She'd forgotten about the notarized copy until I reminded her, gently. One night, after she started asking quiet questions again, I just asked if she remembered filing it in the bottom drawer, under the warranty papers. She did, and when she pulled it out, laid it next to the version Zach had streamlined. With his lawyer friend, the unraveling began. I never told her to look, never told her what she'd find. She found it on her own. That was the beauty of it. By the time I finished my coffee, Zach wasn't shouting. He was pleading, said he was only trying to help, that he was managing the situation before it got worse. Joanna didn't buy it anymore. And Kelsey? She finally saw it. The protection that never felt like love, just quiet control. Zach didn't hug people. He managed them. And when he pulled, no one noticed the leash until it left a mark. Over the next few days, Joanna got to work. She pulled Zach's name from her accounts, called our lawyer, the one she hadn't spoken to in years, had the estate documents reviewed, the will reinstated, Kelsey added back in, Zach's oversight removed without warning. He didn't even know until it was done. 2 days later, he left the house, said he needed space to clear his head. I didn't say goodbye. A week after that, the Department of Human Services sent a letter, this time addressed to me. Unsubstantiated, it said, "Case closed." I left it on the kitchen table. Joanna didn't ask who submitted the complaint, and I didn't offer. It hadn't taken much. Just a quiet submission through their website. Public documentation. A timeline. A few select quotes Zach had dropped too close to the wrong ears. His joke about needing the house sooner than later. A casual remark about my slipping memory. All facts. No opinions. That's how you plant doubt. Calmly, credibly, and without emotion. The bank. Those duplicate payments Joanna noticed weren't accidents. I'd made them. Small amounts. All under $300. Labeled them utility overpayments. Breadcrumbs. Placed where I knew she'd find them, when she needed to. The notebook? It was never for me. It sat in the open, filled with half-thoughts and just enough technical jargon to feel off. Never said what I was doing. Only hinted. Just strange enough to make Zach wonder. Was I slipping? Or planning? That's what shook him, I think. Not the collapse, but the suspicion that I'd seen it coming all along and never lifted a finger. Because I hadn't. I just watched. I moved the board 1 inch. The rest collapsed on its own. Joanna doesn't trust him now. Not in a way you argue about. In the way she double-checks every alert. Logs out of her email when he walks into the room. Says Kelsey and I, instead of Zach and I, when she talks about the future. Kelsey stopped asking him for advice. Zach moved into a 1-bedroom across town. Told his friends it was to be independent. But I know better. He hasn't figured out how to spin the story now that no one's attacking. There's nothing to defend against. Just silence. And that's the worst punishment for a manipulator. He still texts sometimes. Just checking on mom. Need help with the taxes? Trying to keep the thread alive. Hoping something unravels. It won't. The accounts are protected. The estate is sealed. Kelsey has full visibility, and Joanna no longer lets anyone streamline her documents. As for me, I still wake at 6:15. Still walk the dog. Still keep the notebook. These days, it's mostly grocery lists. But I leave it visible, just in case Zach ever stops by again and wants to see what I've been thinking about. And when he reads it, I hope it makes him wonder if it's starting all over again. Because doubt, once planted, never really leaves.